Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, this is Bugs Books, where we talk about books. Specifically on this channel, we talk about Christian fiction. Y'all, I'm a big reader, and I know if you're here, you are too, so I'm excited to connect with you and bring you into the community, and let's get started. So in today's video, we're actually doing a fun one. April 24th is National Bucket List Day, and we've all got them, whether it's a travel bucket list or a bucket list of things that you want to do, or even a bucket list of like career goals. Everybody's got bucket lists of different kinds. So in today's video, we're going to be doing a book bucket list. So I'm going to be recommending some books that I say everybody should read, or at least every Christian fiction fan. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So I've got a few authors on here with several books. I almost split it up with like bucket list authors and bucket list books, but then I thought, nah, we're just going to do books, and if one author has like 9 books on here, that's okay. Okay, so our first author that we're going to be talking about today is Roseanna in White. And the first thing I have to talk to you about is... just found a random bookmark in this book that's probably been there for years and I forgot about. So the first 2 books in the Culper Ring series. So I put this series on here actually for a really personal reason. So the Culper Ring is a historical spy ring. In the American Revolution, George Washington and one of his colonels, Benjamin Talmadge, they started a spy ring called the Culper Ring, and it was pretty much the first spy ring in the United States. And so Roseanna in White wrote this series based loosely off of that historical spy ring, with the first book, Ring of Secrets, taking place in the American Revolution. The second book, Whispers from the Shadows, taking place in the War of 1812, and the third book, Circle of Spies, taking place in the Civil War. Now, I didn't include the third book on this list because, quite frankly, I don't like the third book. So I don't think it's a bucket list book. But I put the first 2 books on here for a personal reason. They're not like the best written of Roseanna in White, but when I was in college, I read this series, and I was so interested in like the Culper Ring and in early espionage in history that I started researching it a little bit more. And in my undergrad, I was a double major, English and history. And so when I was a senior, I had to do 2 senior theses. I had to do one for each major. And for my senior thesis, I ended up doing my senior thesis on how 18th century gender stereotypes affected the role of female espionage agents in the American Revolution. And that was originally inspired by reading these books because there was a female agent in the Culper Ring, and she is one of the only Culper Ring agents who we have never officially discovered her identity. We call her Agent 355 because that was her code name. In Benjamin Talmadge's original code, the number 355 translated to woman, so she's literally Agent Woman. And there are a lot of speculation about who she is. Some historians are really fixed on 1, and some other historians have like 1 or 2 other options. So I think they've narrowed down to like 3 different options of who she could have been. But yeah, she is one of the only agents of the Culper Ring, at least the core agents, that has never had her identity discovered. And so I thought that was really cool. So that got me interested in her story, and then I started researching female espionage agents in the Revolution as a whole, and that ended up becoming my thesis for my undergrad history major. So yeah, those are the Culper Ring series is definitely on my list of must-read books because, I mean, it literally influenced what I wrote my senior thesis in college on. So yeah, so that's the first one. So next we have the Shadows Over England series by Roseanna in White. So the first book in that series is A Name Unknown, and then we have A Song Unheard, and then we have An Hour Unspent. And this is such a good series. It takes place during World War I, or like right before World War I starts and then into World War I. And it is about a group of siblings that were orphans and street urchins that kind of came together and became a family, but also were like thieves in order to support themselves. And as they become adults, they're so good at thieving that the government recruits them to be thieves for the government. And so it's really interesting, especially when it gets into the moral questions. Like, as they become Christians, they're like, okay, now I have to reckon with who I've always been with this. That's in there a lot. And it's got some World War I intrigue in there. It's a great series, and it's one of my bucket list series. The series that Roseanna and White immediately followed Shadows over England with is also on my bucket list today, and that is the Codebreaker series. So the first book in this series is The Number of Love, and if you've heard me, I think I mentioned this in my siblings video a couple weeks ago. The heroine of The Number of Love is the sister of the hero from A Song Unheard, which is her previous series. So so Roseanna and White really likes to connect her series in that way, and it's really fun. The second book in the Codebreaker series is On Wings of Devotion, and this is my second favorite Roseanna and White book and one of my top favorite books ever. So good. And then the third book is A Portrait of Loyalty. Now, all three of these books follow members of World War I England's cryptography department, and so it's really interesting because it really gets into cryptography and how code breaking worked in World War I. And it also, the third book in the series, A Portrait of Loyalty, also gets into like some, because the hero, he's a cryptographer, but the heroine, she is a photographer, and she works for the War Department. So when they say like, sometimes they call her when they need a photo like verified, like, can you tell us if this is a real photo or a fake photo? But they also call her when they need a photo like altered for them to release. And so, she kind of spends some of her time creating fake photos for the War Department to release as their espionage efforts. And so it gets into some moral questions of like, is this because they're in a war, is it morally justified for her to be making create these fake photos and basically like lying, or is it still wrong because the Bible says not to lie? And it gets really deep into those like moral questions, and it's really interesting. I really enjoy it. So that's the Codebreaker series. And then the last book that I haven't mentioned today is not a series. It's just my favorite Roseanna and White book. And if you've been on my channel for a while, you know what I'm talking about. It's Worthy of Legend. This is the third book in the Secrets of the Isle series, and honestly, it blows away the other two books by far. I love this book so much. This book, I've said it before, but it is a masterclass on how to make every scene and every character and every plot point build up towards a spiritual thesis. She has a spiritual point that she is making in this book, basically a spiritual question that she's answering and discussing, and like everything in the book builds around that and builds to that, and it is just, from a writing standpoint and a plotting standpoint, it is just done so well. As a writer myself, I am just so inspired of it, and as an editor and somebody with a master's degree in publishing, I'm like, wow, like that is so good. That is like the prime example to use. Like, yes, I love this book, and it would make any bucket list for me. Like, I just say, read it. Okay, so that covers our first author, which is Roseanna and White. Next, we have Pepper Basham. So for Pepper Basham, I would say bucket list books, all three of the Edgewood books. First, we have Authentically Izzy, and then we have Positively Penelope, and then the third Edgewood book is Loyally Luke. I don't have a copy here because it doesn't come out till next month, May of 2024, but I did read an art copy, and it is so good, and I would recommend it to anybody. It is a bucket list book. So the Edgewood books follow, I say the Edgewood siblings. Technically, Izzy is a cousin, but her parents died when she was younger. I can't remember if she was like a child or a teenager. I think she was like a child, like 10 or 11, if I recall correctly, but I might be wrong, so don't quote me on it. But yes, her parents died when she is young, so she is raised with her cousins, and so she's pretty much a sibling. You have Izzy, Penelope, and Luke, the Edgewood siblings. They also have another sister, but she doesn't have her own book. And all these books are just so amazing. They're so fun because they're written in a hybrid epistolary and prose format. So, and by that I mean most books are written just in regular prose, but then you have epistolary, which historically epistolary means that it's written in epistles or letters. But because this is a modern day read, it's actually, the epistolary part is actually written in text and emails. And so it just adds a whole new level and a whole new layer and nuance to it. It's super, super fun. And I love these books so much. They are definitely on my bucket list for people to read. Okay. So moving on to another author that I have several choices from, and that is Karen Witemeyer. So I actually have 3 choices from Karen Witemeyer, and the first one is A Tailor-Made Bride. This is a super fun standalone. It's definitely an enemies to lovers. It's about a girl named Hannah, and she is a seamstress in a big city, and she works for like a larger dressmaking shop. And so she basically does alterations, and one of the clients that she always alters for is a really rich lady who is dying, and she gets into a conversation about the lady, and they're talking about how her dream is to open her own dress shop, but she's been saving up for all these years and she still has a long way to go. And so the lady ends up surprising her. When she passes away, she actually deeds a shop in a small town to Hannah with the specific instructions that this is for your dream dress shop. And so Hannah moves to this small town to open up her dress shop. However, she immediately gets into conflict with the local livery owner. He had originally wanted to buy that shop so that he could rent it out to a poor family, but he wasn't able to because the lady deeded it to Hannah. So he's already mad at her for that, but he's also mad at her for being a dressmaker because he thinks like fashion and stuff is really frivolous and unbiblical, and he's like, if you look in the Bible, women were hardworking and they were simple and all this stuff, and dress fashion is just all vanity and all this stuff. So he's kind of got this like, oh, I'm on the moral high ground thing going on, and she's just like, what did I do to you? So they both have to grow in there, and it's just really good, and I won't spoil anything for you, but it's just a great straight up historical romance with some really good spiritual lessons in it. Yeah. So then we have No Other Will Do, which is the first novel in the Harper's Station series. This one is so fun. It's a slow burn, friends to lovers. Mal and Emma, yeah, her name's Emma. I had to double check. Mal and Emma are childhood friends who've been separated for a while, but when her women's colony is in danger, she calls them up, and she's like, hey, we need somebody to come in and protect us from these outlaws that are like threatening our women's colony. And he's like, I'm there. I'm always there for you. And he comes and he protects her women's colony. However, even though they have a strong attraction to each other and a strong history, neither of them think it'll work out, mainly because she lives and runs a women's colony and he's not a woman. And so they're really trying to like hold themselves back. So it's definitely a slow burn, but it's super, super fun. It's got some Wild West outlaw action. It's got some spiritual lessons. It's got the fun romance. Definitely a must read. And then the final Karen Witemeyer book I have is The Heart's Charge. This is the second book in the Hangers Horseman series, and it's actually a dual romance, which means there are 2 couples in it, and it's so much fun. It surrounds an orphanage and a mystery about kids getting kidnapped and why they're getting kidnapped. And there's so many, there's so many like young kid characters in this book that really keep the plot lively and that add a lot of fun to it. Also, you've got like a second chance romance in one storyline and kind of a fresh romance in another. So there's kind of pick and choose what your favorite is there. And you've got like friendship and family and following God's calling in your life. Like it's so, so good. This is my favorite Karen Witemeyer novel by far. So yes, definitely a bucket list read. Okay, so then we have, this is the only literary fiction on this list, meaning that it's not a romance, but it is The Extraordinary Deaths of Mrs. Kipp. I always want to add an S to her name. I don't know why. But it's The Extraordinary Deaths of Mrs. Kipp by Sara Brunsvold. This was actually the #1 book that I read in 2023. I loved it so much. It is a contemporary book. So you have Mrs. Kipp, who is in a, oh my goodness, the word just slipped my mind. But she's in a home where there is a term for this. Why can I not think of it? She's dying and they know she's dying. Is it palliative care? Like you're just taking care of them as they die. I want to say it's palliative, but that might be wrong. I don't know why that term just slipped my mind. But anyway, so she is in a home and she's dying and she knows she's dying. So she contacts the local paper and she asks for somebody to write her obituary before she dies so that she can approve of it. And so our main character, Aiden, who is a young female journalist at the local paper, is assigned to write her obituary. So she basically goes to this nursing home every day to try to learn Mrs. Kipp's, see, I can't say it, to learn this woman's story, to write her obituary before she passes away. Mrs. Kipp is a very strong Christian. She's done a lot in her life, evangelism-wise, and a lot of service in her life. And as her story unfolds, it's just so beautiful. It made me cry. It made me aspire to be more like her. She's amazing. And Aiden, who is a Christian but has kind of been like, keeping it on the down low because she thinks it'll affect her career and stuff. She's learning from this woman as well and becoming more and more inspired and more like, why am I, embarrassed by my Christianity? Why am I keeping it a secret? I should be more open about it. And so she's learning these spiritual lessons and Mrs. Kipp is sharing her story. And there's cookies involved. I'll put that in there. The cookies are fun. But yeah, Mrs. Kipp is just such an aspiring character. I absolutely loved her so much. Like, it's really one of the most inspiring books that I've ever read fiction-wise. And so it's definitely on this list as a must-read bucket list book. But because it is about an old woman who's slowly dying, I will say, just be prepared for tears because they're going to be there. Okay, so we're on to our final author, which is Sara Sundin, and I have 2 recommendations from Sara Sundin. Excuse me. The first recommendation is When Twilight Breaks. This book takes place in Munich, Germany in 1938, and our main heroine, Evelyn, is an American journalist who is in Munich covering like German stories for the American press. And our hero is Peter Lang, who is an American graduate student working on his PhD in Germany. And so being in 1938, it's leading up to the events of World War II, and it's from an American journalist's perspective as she watches all this stuff going down in Germany, Hitler's rise to power, the onset of laws against Jews, and the onset of his plans to take over different countries in Europe and beyond, as he eventually tried to do. But yeah, it's just so good. A lot of World War II books that we get can take place in occupied countries, or they can take place in America with American soldiers and their opinions. I don't know about y'all, but I have not read very many that's like set in Munich in the events leading up to it. And you get to a view of these, German citizens that are like, okay, wait. Should we be doing this? It sounded great, but now that I'm seeing it in action, maybe not. And then it's like you just see this slow build of it that, people may not, when they heard all this stuff, all this propaganda at first, they may not have noticed it was so bad. But as they see it building, and we especially see that through Peter. Peter's dad was murdered by a communist back in America, like a group of communists, like just kind of jumped him on the street and beat him to death. And so Peter has this like deep hatred for communism. So when he's in Germany and he hears like the Nazi Party and Hitler, you know, one of the people that they said were bad were communists. And so he's like, oh yeah, they're against communists, like, and they're so organized and all this stuff, and they're so uniform, and I mean, it's great. And Evelyn is like, okay, yes, I can see you like their uniformity and you like their precision, but have you noticed what else is going on? And you can definitely see Peter as like, as other, you know, laws against like anti-Semitism laws are put into place, he kind of steps back and he's like, wait a second, that's not good. And you can see his perception slowly change and his eyes slowly open up to, you know, just beyond the original propaganda that he got on board with, to being like, wait a second, I don't like where this is going. And then so eventually he decides to help Evelyn out, getting her stories. And so, yeah, it's just a really, really interesting look at Germany leading up to World War II, and I really enjoy it. Okay. And then we have my very favorite Sara Sundin book, and one of my favorite books ever, which is Until Leaves Fall in Paris. I've talked about this book on my channel before, and I can never talk about it enough. It's so good. It takes place in Paris in 1940, right as the Nazis march on Paris and occupy it. So we have an American ballerina. Her name is Lucy Gerard, and she is a ballerina for the Paris Opera Ballet, or whatever it's called, the famous ballet in Paris. But she rents a room from two American Jewish booksellers. And so as the Nazis march on France, obviously the booksellers being Jewish, they're like, we have to get home to America. We can't be here when they get here, but we don't have money enough to get there. And so Lucy buys their bookshop from them. She quits the ballet and she takes over the bookshop. And she's like, America is neutral. They're not going to do anything to me. I will stay and run this bookshop so that after the war, you can come back and have your bookshop. Now, obviously, we know the events of history. We know that America eventually joined the war, and so she did not get to stay in Paris forever. But at this point in the novel, she is like, I'm going to stay here during the war. And so she takes over their bookshop so that they can go home to America. Then we have Paul Aubrey. He is an American auto salesman, and his wife dies right before the first part of this novel. And he has a young daughter. I believe she's 4. She's the cutest thing, let me tell you. But at first, you know, with the Germans coming, he just wants to pack up and take his daughter home. But a American congressman who's a close friend of his asks him to stay and to keep his auto shop open, which they knew that his auto shop would get conscripted by the Germans. Like that, they just knew that ahead of time, because why wouldn't it? Like, the Germans are going to conscript it. They're going to take over all the production. They're going to send the production back to Germany to support their war effort. And so by staying in Paris and basically working with the Germans with his auto shop, he becomes, or auto factory. It's not a shop. He makes the cars. It's a factory. But anyway, he basically becomes a collaborator. He's working with the Germans. But this congressman asks him to do this so that he can collect information on the Germans to share with the U.S. Government, so that when they eventually enter the war, which they know they will eventually, they have this information. And so Paul basically, because he can't tell anybody he's doing this, because it's espionage, it's spying, you know, all of his American friends in Paris basically turn on him, and they're like, you're a terrible collaborator. I can't believe you're supporting Germany. Your poor deceased wife, it's so great that she's gone because she would be so disappointed in you. Which, I'm sorry, saying that you're glad somebody's spouse is dead because they'd be disappointed in them is a really low blow. Like, come on, these people are Christians and they're saying this, not okay. But yeah, so he's dealing with that, and they have to learn to trust each other while keeping secrets from each other. Lucy eventually becomes involved in the resistance as well, and that's not something she can share. So they both have their secrets from each other, and they're both not sure if they can trust each other. And it's just, the way their relationship grows is one of the most beautiful things. I love it so much. One of my favorite books of all time, and definitely a bucket list read. Yeah. Okay. So next we have some books that I don't have in print. I really should. I have them on Kindle. Oh, I have all of these on Kindle, but I don't have them in print. I need to get them on print. Okay, sorry. So next we have A Noble Masquerade by Kristi Hunter. This is like by far Kristi Hunter's most popular book. Like, anybody I've heard talk about Kristi Hunter will tell you that A Noble Masquerade is their favorite book, and it's for a good reason. This book is fantastic. It is the first full-length book in the Hawthorne House series. There is a novella at the beginning of the series, which is, the name has slipped my mind, but I'll put it up on the screen. But yes, this is the first full-length novel of the series, and it takes place probably right around like 1811, 1810 or so. I don't remember specifically, but it's right in that Regency era. And we have Miranda, the daughter of a duke. Well, actually, the sister of a duke, because her father has passed and her oldest brother is now the duke. So she's the sister of the duke. She's going into her third or fourth season at this point, so she's basically like a spinster. And she doesn't know why nobody wants to marry her for love. Like, she really wants to marry for love, but everybody either seems to want her because of her position to her brother or because of the land they can get from her or what. And she's like, nah, I'm not marrying for anything less than love. Sorry. And so in her loneliness and her frustrations and her self-doubt of why nobody will marry her plainly for love, she writes these letters, which actually this is something she's been doing as a child. But she writes these letters to her brother's best friend, who is also a duke. I forget his dukely title. His name, yeah, okay. But she writes these letters to him and then she sticks them in a trunk and like never sends them. But her brother's new valet accidentally finds one once and he sends it off. And so a little pen pal situation starts, and that's all I'm going to say, not to spoil it. If you've read the book, you know it's way more complicated than that, but I'm not going to say anything more because I don't want to spoil it, but it definitely is a bucket list read. The next book I have, oh, sorry, my throat is getting dry. The next book I have is also a Kristi Hunter book. It is A Pursuit of Home. It is the third book in, I forget the name of the series. It's like A Safe Haven or something refuge, something like that. But it's the third book, and it's just really good. I've forgotten all the characters' names right now. But it's about a girl who has spent the last several years spying for England, but she's retired now. The book is called Pursuit of Home, but she was taken out of France at a very young age as a political refugee. She was basically, I think she's like 14 or so, and she's rescued by a spy. He's somebody we know from previous novels, but I'm not going to say who. But she's rescued by an English spy who basically trains her up to be a spy herself, and so she spends quite a number of years as an English spy, but now she is retired, and now she is trying to find out if any of her family is still alive and things like that. Again, I'm not going to go into too many details because I don't want to spoil it, and also, like, I don't want to get anything wrong. But anyway, it's definitely a bucket list book. It's really, really good, and I love the characters, I love the plot, I love the spiritual lessons. It's just fantastic. Bucket list book. Right. Next we have a Tracy Peterson book, which is Touching the Sky. It is the second book in, I can't remember the series name, but it's something in Texas. It takes place right after the Civil War in Corpus Christi. And we have our main girl who is a kind of higher class citizen of Corpus Christi. Her father is very rich. And then we have our main hero, which is a Union soldier. And so they've got some cultural boundaries there. She also really wants to educate former slaves and African Americans, but she comes up against a lot of resistance from that. There is some espionage going on because her sister's fiance is a Confederate who doesn't believe the war is over, I'll put it that way. And so the Union Army has this guy on their watch list, and they send our hero in to kind of keep an eye on him, which is how he and the heroine get thrown together. And so it's got a little bit of action and espionage there. It's also got some great romance and some great spiritual lessons. It's definitely a bucket list book. Goodness. I've used my voice a lot today. It's really fading out here. I'm getting scratchy. So we have one more book on our list, and that is Maureen Lang's Whisper on the Wind. And this is like, I don't hear a lot about Maureen Lang in the YouTube and Bookstagram community, but when I read this book, I was in high school, and it was just so good. This book takes place in occupied Belgium in World War I, and it is about the underground resistance newspaper in Belgium. And it's just, like, from a historic standpoint, so good. It's a really thick book, like it's quite long, but it is so good, especially from a historic standpoint. It is a romance, but the romance is definitely secondary to the historical plot. Our main heroine, Izzy, she is half Belgian and half American. And when the war starts, or when the threat of war starts, her parents take her out of Belgium to America. But she basically takes a bunch of her diamonds that she owns, because she's really rich, and she uses them to buy her way back into Belgium after it's occupied in order to rescue her former nanny and the nanny's 2 kids, which is our main hero, is her older son, and she also has a younger son. But our main hero, Edward, he is running the local resistance newspaper. So when Izzy shows up, first of all, he's really mad because he's like, how did you get here and why are you here? I can't believe you're here. He's so mad at her. But he's also like, I'm not leaving. I have a job to do here, even though it's dangerous. Like, he really believes in it. So he's like, I'm not going. And his mother's like, I'm not going without him. And so Izzy's like, well, then I'm not going. So put me to work. So yeah, there's that going on. But it's so good. I don't remember if each chapter, but at least most of the chapters start with like an excerpt from the paper. And some of them, they may all be written for the novel, but if I remember correctly, I believe some of them are actually like excerpts from underground Belgian newspapers that the author found and worked into her novels. I might be wrong about that, but I think that some of them at least are actual historical excerpts. But I might be wrong. I don't remember, but I think they are. Anyway, so it's just, from a historical standpoint, it's so well researched, and it was one of the first fiction books that actually made me cry. I mean, like, tear come down, cry. It's just so good, and it doesn't get enough hype. I'm just going to put that there. So, those are all the books on my bucket list reads list. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you have books that you think are bucket list reads that you would recommend to absolutely anybody, please let me know in the comments. I would be so excited to learn them. And yeah, let's keep in touch. I'll see you in the next video.